Ex-inmates. What was the stupidest thing you've seen a new inmate do on the first day in prison? Story 1. Told a kid there was a pool out in the yard. Guards saw him waiting to go out in shorts with his towel and asked him what he was doing. Kid said, "I'm gonna go swimming outside, it looks nice. Don't think I've laughed so hard in my life." It's unoriginal, but always funny. Story 2. Father-in-law did 12 years on a second-degree murder back in the early 90s. He told me that one time this new guy plopped himself down at Hell's Angels table and started eating breakfast. When he was told to move, he ignored them. After breakfast, the correctional officers ended up having to cut through about 6 rolls of duct tape to get this guy loose. He never sat near the Hell's Angels again. Story 3. There was an old myth that if you challenged the meanest guy in your block to a fight, everyone else would leave you alone. It's true, no one will torment you if you're dead. The kid tried it and got dropped off the 5th tier. First day in Gen Pop, last day in Gen Pop. Most guys just want to do their time alone. Most rape and violence in prisons are about debt or tax. If you play it straight, 98% of these guys will just leave you alone. F***ing someone up in the yard makes your time worse, not better. Loss of privilege or time in solitary, most people don't want that. Most of the straight-up psychopaths are in 23-1 lockdown anyway. You get in debt or shoot your mouth off and you will get settled or taxed. Both are to be avoided. Story 4. This may not have been his first day, but I will never forget this. This was while I was in the intake tank, which is the first tanker section that you go into after being processed in the county. This young kid comes into the county and keeps complaining that he doesn't have his cannabinol and other marijuana-related prescriptions in jail. He was really arrogant and constantly pissed everyone off. During count one day, as we were all in our bunks, he starts complaining again, and then says to the guard, "What if we all riot?" Immediately, like 10 other guys yell very loudly, "We don't know or agree with him." The guard then says, "What the f*** did you say?" And the kid then continues about rioting and that he has rights. Everyone in the tank stays like frozen in their bunks, trying their best to be non-threatening and also show that they have no interest in what this moron is saying. So the guard picks him up by his throat and slams him into the wall. After scaring the kid shitless, he explains that he has a new charge for inciting a riot. The kid gets hauled off to solitary and we never saw him again. But I heard he spent the rest of his 30, 60, 90 whatever days in solitary. Absolutely insane to me that he would say that in a county jail. Story 5. Just going to generalize. Small town folk who are used to being the biggest and baddest. Big fish, small pond type guys who think they are going to be kings when they walk in. They usually are dominated pretty quick. Dominated either by being beaten or made into a bitch. The best bet if you go to prison, hopefully no one ever goes, is unless you know someone well-connected on the inside, just keep your head down, focus on yourself, and do your time. It's going to be boring, menial, and seemingly endless, but you don't want to get caught up in any gang stuff or be snitching. There's a code and system in prison that needs to be followed, and if you walk in like a king shit of Turd Hill when you're a nobody, you will learn real quick that you ain't nothing. Story 6. I found a hypodermic needle in my thin mattress and tried to give it to the guard. I was bum-rushed by an inmate, whose it probably was, and told that if I had given it to the guard, I would have faced a P-test in solitary. This was day 1. On day 3, I asked to trade laundry detergent for a back rub, and only after I did so did I realize that everyone there thought I was gay. I was a very dumb 18-year-old white girl. Story 7. Skinny kid, hippie type got busted with some Someone else on the range was getting beaten up for something or other when the kid tried to intervene. Just said, "Hey, leave him alone." Got beat to within an inch of his life in the shower. Pro tip, in jail, mind your own business. Story 8. More stupid employee. A good friend, Steve, worked as a locksmith for a medium security prison. A really unpleasant job, apparently. He bid on and got the job as a groundskeeper. He was the only actual prison employee, and his foreman staff were trusty prisoners. The job was overseeing grounds using tractors, hand mowers, and lawn equipment. Some minor repairs were allowed, and the shop had tools for repairs. The groundskeeping hut was not in the actual prison grounds, but it had its own unmonitored employee driveway and employee entrance. There was a separate locked fence driveway that went directly into prison. This was how prisoners and equipment came and went. The trustees were only searched when they returned to the prison grounds, either on the mowers or when returning to their cells. Otherwise, the groundskeeping hut was not frequently inspected. It was a plum prisoner job. My friend bought an old Harley which ran, but not well. One trustee was a made motorcycle gang member, and my friend and him bonded over motorcycles. One day, Steve brought his motorcycle to work and showed it to the trustee. The trustee listened to the motor and said the bike needed bearings, which meant an overhaul, a $4,000 job. If Steve could bring in the crew an hour or two before they were supposed to return to their cells, the trustee felt like he could use that extra hour to overhaul the bike in a few weeks. And in the first days, he totally disassembled the Harley's motor. Later that day, while returning to prison, the trustee got caught smuggling in a small screwdriver, which meant this trustee's crew would never return. Steve knew the groundskeeping hut would be inspected the next morning, and he got the motorcycle frame and wheels onto a pickup and taken out of the shop. He didn't have time to get the motor parts, which he could claim were leftover lawnmower parts, but he knew that unmistakable motorcycle frame with wheels was his termination. The next day, the inspectors glanced at the parts and made him take all the extra parts to a secured dumpster. He was reprimanded for not inventorying tools daily and having loose mower parts. The Harley was toast, but he actually kept his job. Story 9. Here in Canada, there isn't really any rape in prisons, as they look at it like, how can we beat up or kill sex offenders if we're ones ourselves? It was my first time in a federal pen, and I didn't know this golden rule. My first day I got there, I was assigned to a cell, and when I went in, this older guy was in it, my future cellmate. He told me the guy who had the bunk before me wasn't a really clean guy, and I should get some disinfectant and a mop, and pointed me in the direction of the cleaning supplies room. I went in and was filling my mop bucket when I looked up and noticed these kinds of shelves on the wall that said Government of Canada on them. On the shelves were condoms and lube and bleach. My eyes widened and I went back to the cell and whispered loudly to my cellie, "What the f***, they're encouraging r-?" I told him about the condoms and he laughed. Bro, there are gay guys in here who have consensual sex and it's their way of stopping HIV. We just use the bleach to clean our tattoo needles or dye our hair if we get bored. Hey guys, are you enjoying the video? If so, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it means a lot. Anyway, back to the video. Story 10. Worked in the hospital of a prison. The tiny white guy was an enforcer for the big motorcycle club on the outside, and his signature threat was a big Bowie knife, which they do not let you bring inside, but that did not check his attitude at all. Flash forward like 2 hours after he is checked in, and he is being beaten up by a large member of one of the indigenous gangs for running his mouth off about how he could take all comers, and got thrown in solitary for his own protection. 2 weeks after he gets out of solitary, I see him sitting in the waiting room to see the head psychologist, old crusty Eye of Sauron type, calmly tells the doctor that he is going to cut himself if he does not get put back in solitary. Doctor replies, "Okay, but I hear you have been running up a tab, so go ahead and do it. I'll get you stitched back up and sent right back out there. Time to tell me what's going on." Tatted up tiny just bursts into tears and starts bawling about his 2K debt that he's run up in 2 weeks. He went back to segregation for the maximum amount of time we could keep him there. Story 11. Come in and refuse to show their papers. This is a big no-no. Even if you're embarrassed about why you got arrested, if it's not a crime against a child or a few others, then you better be ready to prove so. If you don't, they are automatically going to assume that you're no good and you're either going to pay a rent, check out of the pod or unit, or bond out and stay out. Also, I've seen people who don't fight back if they're tested. It's better to fight and lose than to not fight at all if provoked. Story 12. The stupidest thing I've seen on someone's first day of prison is my own first day. I came in so addicted to Xanax and heroin, I was puking and both green fluid, shaking, sweating. My temp was 104 and my entire body felt like every single individual bone was breaking. And I've broken a few bones before, I know that pain. But the worst part of it was the psychotic shit I was hallucinating. Seeing people that weren't there, hearing people that weren't there, talking to people who were never there at all. I was having awful panic attacks, waking nightmares, and tremors. I was also having heart palpitations, and after a while, I started having seizures. It was at this point, specifically this point, that the medical staff decided they should probably get involved and give me an anticonvulsant before I die in this cell with like 6 other dudes in it watching me. That was all I got though, nothing to ease the withdrawals at all. Even something like Suboxone would stop my heroin withdrawals after a couple days of being clean and you can't get high off it. But they literally don't care. So it went like that every day for weeks. Don't do drugs, and if you do, remember severe Xanax withdrawals can very likely cause death. And severe Xanax withdrawals truly never ends. It can and will do permanent things to your psyche. Many people who abuse Xanax will get clean and months after the withdrawals get a thing called rebound anxiety. Xanax artificially reduces anxiety, which means your brain compensates by not releasing or producing and storing the chemicals to reduce anxiety. Every time you take a Xanax, you rob your brain's natural ability to reduce anxiety, and many people who had never had mental health problems before this will be diagnosed with severe anxiety disorders after severe long-term benzodiazepine use. Fuck that shit. Story 13. Jammed the toilet full of a big wad of paper. The cell was on the top tier, flooding the entire block. For some insane reason, the toilets just constantly have water running, like they are constantly flushing. Not sure if that's a common thing? The dude came back in, went to his cell, and immediately flooded the entire block while he was barricaded in his cell. Extraction unit came and stormed the unit, made everyone in the block lay face down on the flood of water, yes, the water from the toilet, which was legit 2 inches deep on the block, and then they pepper sprayed the fuck out of the dude's cell, which meant in turn that we were all getting pepper sprayed, while laying belly down outstretched in toilet water. This was in Georgia, so it was legit 100 plus degrees in the block, and everyone was covered in toilet water and pepper spray. They dragged the dude out and everyone in the block was raging mad. 12 dudes maybe in the block. The dude was back in the block 3 days later. We were all still wearing the same jumpsuits because jail sucks, and that's how that goes. Thank God for soap and showers. The dude promptly got his ass beat, was pulled from the block. I assume he was taken to medical. He was fairly lumped up and bleeding, and was brought right back to the same block the same day, got his ass beat again, and after the second time, instead of moving him to another block, they locked him in his own cell. I was there for a month after that, and the dude never once was outside his cell. No record, no nothing. They literally just left him locked in the cell for 24 hours a day. This was at a county jail. Brutal jail. Damn, telling that story just made me think of a bunch of up shit. Glad those days are behind me. Story 14. My first day in jail was the first time I'd ever been and will ever go, that's for sure. Made the mistake of not keeping my stare in check at some dude's eyes. I kept eye-f***ing him, and anytime I'd get up from the chair in the pit, he'd come and put his coat down on my seat. I gladly never ate at the same time he did. He stared at myself from his for a long time. Real f*** up. The doors click open for dinner, and my cellmate stayed asleep. I went down by myself and tried to do it all the right way. Wore shoes, brought my cup down, and kept to myself. Minutes later, he comes out and yells at the whole pod, "Where is my cellmate at? Who's my cellmate in 215? I said, "Right here." This dude was huge, and he towered over into my face. "You're just gonna let a brother starve in here?" Saying that I'm racist and he's from Florida, he doesn't really know what it's like out here in my state. Someone else said, "That's some real shit, though." I didn't know it was my job to let him know there was food. I owned up to it and said that it's not like that. I'm not racist, I've just never been locked up before. A person at our table said, "You gonna punk his ass?" He said no. I think they thought I couldn't understand them because their speech was so cryptic in a barely audible and mouthful kind of way. Maybe some people know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I got back into the cell and apologized, saying I just didn't know. He said, "This is the first time you've ever been locked up?" Said, "Yeah," and I apologized again. After, he said, "Say no more, man." I figured he meant that literally. I shut the f*** up after that. Story 15. Not prison, waiting to get bail. In the dog kennels with 20 to 30 others, maybe 20 full kennels, 2 courts going overtime. This was a Thursday before a long weekend, which meant that courts closed for 4 days. Everyone was desperate for their chance in front of the judge. A bid for bail and freedom, managing to avoid the extra 4-day lockdown. Anyway, once I've been called, have my bail approved, and get brought to processing for a few more hours. The processing area is right next to the pre-hearing kennel area, so I was up fairly early in the day, almost first out the gate of the first kennel. One guy in my kennel was a rattling and scratching crackhead. He went up and spat across the court at the judge. Must have got him or someone else. Next thing I know, they got this crackhead hauled back down into the kennels. They closed down the whole court and marked it as a crime scene. Now there is an army of pissed off criminals that want to stop the crackhead because now they won't get to see the judge to get bail. Almost caused a riot, forgot to mention that. He ended up in protection in an isolated watch cell to stop everything from getting to him. Stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Funny thing is, the crackhead would be bailed too. Got no idea why he did it. Story 16. Not prison, but jail. It was always dumb stuff that we would prank them with. One example is having someone get a look at the name on their wristband and then go to the phone like they were answering it. They would then yell the new guy's name and look around. The new guy would finally say, "That's me," and the guy on the phone would say, "Oh, here, it's for you." When the new guy walked over and said hello, the whole pod would start laughing. You don't get phone calls in jail. Another was messing with new cellmates. One cellmate and I had been cellmates for a while, so when we got a third in our cell, we'd lay out a cell schedule for him, with all ridiculous things such as, after lights out, we did 200 jumping jacks every Wednesday. We'd get to Wednesday and tell him to slide his portable bed under the bottom bunk and start doing jumping jacks and counting them off. They would 100% of the time join in, and we'd usually get to 20 or so before we couldn't contain our laughter and then explain that there was no cell schedule or jumping jacks. One time, I had been in for a year, a total of 15 months, and had some clout at that point. I'm not a hard ass, but I can handle my own and have only been in 2 necessary self-defense fights at that time. With more time in jail comes certain privileges. You get a better seat by the TV, you get into the front of the line for meals, etc. A new guy came into the pond that day, and I heard the door click open for food to be served, even though most people were already lined up after the announcement to line up. I went to the front and got my food first, as did others with much more time than most. This is jail, not prison, so anything over a year is a fairly long stay in the county I was in. Apparently, this new guy didn't take too kindly to me. Specifically, going to the front, he started staring at me for the rest of the day, a mean mug if you will. I took a shower, and when I got out, an inmate came up to me and told me the new guy had told him that he planned on just straight sucker punching me. Here's the thing, don't ever tell anyone that, especially if you're new and don't know anyone. I was well liked throughout the pod and didn't have problems with anyone, for the most part. I was generous to those who were hungry, I was a damn fine card player, I had a sense of humor and wasn't a hard ass. I didn't tolerate disrespect from race to race, and I sure as hell didn't plan on getting sucker punched. So I, in front of the whole pod, said, "Hey man, I hear you've got it in your head that you're gonna sucker punch me. Is that true?" He said it was true, and I politely asked him to go into my cell for an actual fight, not some bitch-ass sucker punch. Don't go into someone's cell for a fight, by the way. Who knows what they have prepared to attack you with. I didn't have anything but my fists, though. I proceeded to beat the shit out of him. Like he didn't get a single shot in on my face. His head and face were left bloodied and lumped. I will say that when the guards asked him what happened at dinner, he didn't say a word about me. I guess the dumb thing he did was A, not respecting privileges that come with time, and B, thought a sucker punch was the answer and told someone about it. Story 17. Admitted he got arrested in a motel room with a 13-year-old girl. This was county jail, not prison. It's no longer true that pedophiles get locked up because of PREA and all that, but they definitely are hated, and there's nothing that will change that. It's also not true that the biggest, toughest guy is the one who's respected unless it's high security. The man whose word means what he says and nothing less, and the man who fights only for his friends/himself and not for personal gain, is the man everyone will respect. And that's all you have there. Who you are as a man and snacks. I told that kid on his first day to just accept whatever he gets for what he did, and not to defend himself, not physically but like verbally, because you're never going to redeem yourself in anyone's eyes at that point. Someone called him a sick and this kid called him a and that was the last time he ate until he checked in to protective custody. Jail is weird. You will meet the very best people and the very worst people. If I didn't have a family that I felt I abandoned, you always will, then I would have a positive view of being incarcerated. Only like 70 or 80% of the inmates are scumbags and criminals. That place will make them into absolute animals that are beyond saving given enough time. Those other 20% that do get more than 6 weeks can come out of it with a heart and soul of pure gold, or they get put into segregation and their minds break. After 3 weeks, I saw my imaginary friend once, and they were the most human of anyone I had for weeks. That kid had to spend the whole time there. And he was 18 and scared. When he gets released, he's going to destroy some girl's life, and all that's gonna matter is him not getting caught. When that happens, it'll be the third time I've seen the exact same shit occur just like that. If you even end up in jail, don't say a word and do not trust people coming up to you. Look for the guy that everyone else is going to, the guy that isn't putting on some tough guy act, and don't ever accept a 2-for-1 from anyone you didn't ask for something from. Story 18. Was in for a probation violation, not prison but jail for 45 days. This was years ago. About 15 days into my sentence, a new guy that was incredibly weird came into our sector, and I happened to be bunked with a murderer. He wasn't sentenced at this point and was surprisingly incredibly kind to me, and had my back all the way through. Actually had a lot of good conversation. He came back into the block at, say, 7 p.m. just before lockdown. Guards checked him, but he did not put his ID card on the window for everyone to see. The next morning, he got knocked into a different world. Turned out he was a pedo, and someone in the block found out about his case. I mean, beaten to hell, to the point I believe they life-flighted him to the hospital. Advice for a new person going to jail: if you are not big and can't fight, don't surrender, but try and be friends with people, and you will be fine. Show some sort of kickback, but not too much. Use instincts and gauge the situation.